Once upon a gentle medieval evening, when the castle bells rang slowly and the torches flickered along the gray stone walls, a small rat named Reginald scurried across the quiet courtyard, dreaming of armor that shone like morning water and a title that would make every sparrow bow, for he had long believed he was meant to be a knight, though his whiskers twitched with greed and his tail often tangled in trouble. Yet still he carried a hopeful heart, steady and warm. The market outside the gates hummed with voices. Bread and apples and cheeses lay on rough tables, bright cloths waved like little banners, and the air smelled of cinnamon and wood smoke, and Reginald darted under barrels and benches, pretending to inspect supplies for the king, while he nibbled a crumb here and a sweet flake there, whispering that a knight in training must taste every ration. A royal messenger rode in and called for a grand tournament, with silver helms, painted shields, and a feast in the great hall after sunset, and the news rang around the town like a bell in clear air. Reginald puffed his chest and told the pigeons that soon Sir Reginald the rat would ride, and the pigeons bobbed their heads, which he took as applause, though they only wanted crumbs. He hurried to the armory, where swords and shields hung like stars, and helms slept on pegs like metal pumpkins, and he tugged and pushed and heaved, until a vast helmet rolled from a shelf and boomed upon the floor. The armor was far too large, yet Reginald wriggled into a breastplate, his nose poking from the neck hole, his tail dragging like a rope over stone, and he squeaked with pride, though he could barely move. He tried to lift a sword, the sword clattered, he tried to lift a shield, the shield toppled him, he tried to bow to an imaginary queen, the helmet slid over his eyes, and he rolled like a shiny acorn across the floor. Still, he told himself that knights never give up, so he shuffled out to the courtyard, clank by clank, where squires polished boots and laughed softly, and stable boys fed warm nose-breathing horses, and even the captain hid a smile. The king passed by with a kindly stride, his crown bright as corn, and he said that if the tiny warrior could stay upon his feet until the supper bell, he might sit at the end of the feast and taste a proper cheese. Before dawn, he woke in the straw and practiced with a broom, which he called a staff of wisdom, and though the broom bounced and poked him, he marched in circles, counting steps, and naming every wobble a glorious strike. At the stables, he studied the horses who snorted like velvet kettles, he placed a paw in a stirrup, slipped, and landed in hay, and declared that a knight must learn the language of hay before the language of speed. The stable-master shook his head and smiled, handed him a neat square of cheese, and said that strength comes from supper and from patience, and Reginald nodded as if he had been given a scroll of wisdom. In the cool shade of the inner yard he gathered courage, then ventured down the dungeon stairs, hunting for a noble quest. The stones sweated with old stories, and the air fluttered with wings, and just as he said, "Behold a dragon," a cloud of bats rose from a beam. Reginald squeaked and ran. The helmet rang like a bell at each step. Bats swirled like a soft storm. He flopped out into daylight and announced that a shadow beast had tested his courage and found it perfectly chewy. The guards laughed until tears shone on their lashes, not cruelly, but warmly, and one tied a ribbon around the tail of the armor to keep it from dragging. That evening, he crept to the kitchen, following a river of bright smells, pies cooling. On the sill, stews dreaming in iron pots, and he told a sleepy cat that a knight must guard the kingdom by tasting the kingdom. He scrambled up a table leg, tripped on a spoon, slid into a bowl of cream, and sat up shining like a frosted statue, and the cooks laughed, set him on a cloth, and gave him a raisin. He declared the raisin a medal, pinned it with a dab of cream, tried to look serious, then sneezed the medal into his paw, and the cooks clapped. Night settled on the towers like blue velvet, the bells softened, torches breathed shorter flames, and Reginald dragged his huge helmet to a corner, curled within it, and counted victories that were really tumbles, and tumbles that were really lessons. He said that tomorrow he would ride, tomorrow he would tilt at a cabbage set upon a stick, tomorrow he would not take crumbs that were not given, for a true knight keeps his paws honest, and his mouth honest as well. With that vow, he closed his eyes, the courtyard murmured like a lullaby, the stars wrote their silver commas across the roof of the world, and the armor around him cooled to a quiet shell, in which a very small dream beat like a very brave drum. Thursday. Morning of the tournament arrived, and the sky over the castle shone as blue as polished glass, while banners waved in the breeze and trumpets called knights and nobles to the field, and Reginald stirred from his helmet bed with a squeak of determination, for today he would show the kingdom his courage. The courtyard filled with armored men riding tall horses, their helms shining, their lances straight, their cloaks snapping like sails in the wind, and between their hooves scampered Reginald, his armor clanking louder than all the drums, his tail tied with the ribbon a guard had gifted him, and he shouted with his thin, squeaky voice that Sir Reginald the Rat had arrived to defend the honor of the crown. The children in the stands clapped and laughed, the lords raised their brows in amusement, and the knights whispered that perhaps the rat was braver than some of them, for at least he dared to appear, even if his armor sagged and bumped upon the earth. He waddled to the tilt yard and tried to mount a horse. The horse looked down with patient eyes, sighed a hot breath over his ears, and stepped aside as Reginald slipped and landed in the hay again, declaring that it was all part of his tactical training, for a knight must first master the ground before the saddle. When the contests began, the knights clashed with lances and shields, sparks flying, cheers rising, but Reginald only managed to roll into a barrel of water, which toppled him out across the grass like a squeaky cannonball, and the crowd roared with laughter. But the king nodded thoughtfully, for a spirit that will not quit is worth more than steel. Later, in the archery contest, Reginald dragged a bow twice his size, staggered, released an arrow that spun and landed in a pie stall, and proudly claimed it as his first victory in food hunting, though the baker chased him until a guard calmed the matter with a grin and a coin. At last the sun set, and the feast began in the great hall. Long tables creaked under platters of roasted meats, towers of bread, wheels of cheese, bowls of custard and cream, and wines that glowed red and tall. Jugs and candles flickered against tapestries of kings and saints. Reginald sneaked in with his armor dripping water and hay, clambered up a chair leg, and stumbled into a pudding bowl so deep that he vanished for a moment, only to rise covered in golden custard from snout to tail, the spoon stuck to his helmet, his eyes wide, his whiskers matted, and he declared in triumph that he had claimed the sacred armor of sweetness. Nobles laughed, servants clapped, and even the queen's hand covered her smile as the little rat marched down the table, dripping pudding onto roasted goose and bread rolls, and bowing clumsily to every plate. He tried to spin like a knight, in a dance, clattering and sliding, and at last toppled across the floor, rolling to a stop before the queen's slippers, and there he knelt, sticky and shining, with custard dripping from his tail. The queen, gentle and kind, bent down and tied a silken ribbon around him, saying that though he was clumsy and greedy for food, and silly beyond measure, he had brought more laughter and joy to the feast than all the jousts of the day, and so she named him Sir Custard the Clumsy. The hall rang with cheers, cups were raised, children shouted his name, and Reginald squeaked with delight, puffing his chest and bowing so deeply that the pudding dribbled over his nose. From that evening on, Reginald was allowed to sit at the edge of every feast, given crumbs of cheese and slices of apple, and though he never rode a horse, nor held a sword steady, nor won a duel, he told every mouse in the cellar that he was the bravest knight the kingdom had ever known. And they listened wide-eyed as he spoke of dragons in the dungeon, broomstick battles, and custard armor, tales that grew grander each time. When the nights grew quiet, and the torches burned low, and the castle bells chimed like sleepy voices, Sir Custard the Clumsy curled once more inside his oversized helmet, the ribbon shining on his tail, his belly full of crumbs and cream, and whispered, "Tomorrow I shall be even greater," and though everyone knew tomorrow would bring more tumbles, more greedy mistakes, and more laughter, they also knew that the kingdom was brighter with him in it, for even the smallest rat, with the silliest armor, can become a knight in his own way.